Waiting for the signalman to set the switch so he could get back to the yard. Percy was being rather careless and not paying attention. Edward had warned Percy, "Be careful on the main line. Whistle to the signalman that you are there." But Percy didn't remember to whistle, and so the busy signalman forgot him. Percy waited and waited. The switch was still against him, so he couldn't move. Then he looked along the main line. Beep, beep! He whistled in horror.
Percy Runs Away was an episode that I was surprised to find out had a true story behind. However, being one of those classic episodes I really should have known by now, and despite what the intro may have made you think, the event that would inspire this story is actually kind of funny, opposed to being normally sad or tragic, which is, normally how these go, and honestly in a way kind of interesting. In the episode itself, Thomas, Percy, and Edward are shunting some trucks in the yards. However, Thomas goes off with Annie and Clarabelle and Edward is sent to the quarry, meaning it's just Percy who has to take the freight cars now. At this point in the show, Percy is, I guess what you could call still infantile, and doesn't exactly know his way around the railway. After dropping off some trucks, he ends up stopping at a signal box. It's at this point that Percy is supposed to whistle at the signalman to let him know that he's there, being something that Edward had actually told him. However, Percy ends up forgetting to do so, and much to his horror, he is then met with Gordon barreling towards him on the same line that he's on. Percy's crew ends up jumping clear, and Gordon actually ends up stopping right before Percy, and of course is annoyed, but before he can say anything to Percy ends up throwing it in reverse and just takes off running. He's so scared that he ends up going completely over Gordon's hill without even noticing, and isn't stopped until he's intentionally derailed and sent into a siding. Of course, Percy's not hurt, and neither is Gordon. Gordon actually is the one who ends up coming back to save Percy. I guess he felt bad. I mean, I would too if I scared somebody that much. And Percy ends up getting pulled out of the embankment and everything ends up okay. What's funny is the events that actually took place in real life aren't too crazy far off from this. And I know what you're thinking. How the hell does a train run away? And that's actually what we're going to talk about now. I accidentally lied to you guys. It turns out that there's two different events that could have inspired this episode. And in a way, I'm actually kind of thankful for that, seeing as there's not a whole lot of information in the first story. However, what is known is the locomotive, that being engine number 1466 of the Great Western Railway, in 0402 14XX like Oliver is, and actually is the engine that you're looking at now, currently being preserved at the Didcot Railway Center. The engine would happily be waiting on the main line for clearance from the signalman to leave. Unfortunately, the signalman wasn't aware of the engine's presence, however. As a consequence, an express train had actually been routed onto the same line. Upon seeing the oncoming express, the fireman would jump clear and the driver would try to move the engine. The express would end up hitting 1466 and knocking the driver out of the cab. This, however, also would set the engine in motion. 1466 would run driverless down the main line backwards for 7 miles. Eventually, the locomotive itself would be intentionally derailed. The location and event is dated to Newton Abbott in 1939. I guess in a way not as much is known about the second one, despite there being a tad bit more information on what actually happened in the event itself. I wasn't actually able to find a picture of the locomotive that was involved. What is known is that the locomotive itself was an 060T. This would take place on the old Somerset and Dorset Railway on the 29th of July in 1936. A freight train hauled by a 280 locomotive had just passed through some signals of danger in the vicinity of a local signal box, not too far from Radstock. It came into a slight collision with the 060T locomotive, that being locomotive number 7620, which was engaged in shunting duties. In anticipation of the crash, the crew of the 280 would actually jump clear of the locomotive. The driver of the 060T, also realizing what was about to happen, would then start the train to reverse and then leap off. His fireman would do the same, leaving the regulator just slightly open. The driver then managed to clamber onto the now almost stationary 280 locomotive and would bring it to a halt. The 060T, however, would unfortunately roll off, minus its crew. The locomotive itself had a consist of 8 wagons in front of it, and now was picking up speed while also encountering different gradients. By the time the runaway train would reach Midford, some 5 miles away, most of the wagons that were attached to the train had actually been thrown off of the tracks, and because of this it actually caused quite a bit of damage, even going as far as to partially wreck a signal box, as well as different station buildings at Midford. Fortunately, the eventual derailment of the last wagon had actually brought the engine to a standstill, this actually taking place right before it would stall a major junction. Just like I stated previously, though I shouldn't have been, I was pretty surprised to find a true story behind this episode. Everything that takes place in it just seems so, I don't know, I guess perfect for the Thomas universe. When you think of a runaway train, you normally don't think of a train actually, kind of running away. So to know that this episode does have a real life basis, as well as how close the real life basis is to the episode, it really is something. I stand by the fact that the Reverend W. Awdry could turn anything into a story for trains, so long as it actually featured them. This episode not only stuck out to me, but I'm sure stuck out to a lot of you all as a kid, so hopefully this little bit of extra information can help you appreciate it just a little bit more. If there's any other episodes you guys think I should check out, be sure to let me know down in the comments. And thank you guys again for watching. See you guys in the next one.